What would you do if you witnessed a powerful politician, a man who built his career on family values and moral decency, publicly humiliate a homeless veteran on live television, only to realize in the most shocking way possible that the man he was mocking was someone from his own forgotten past? The crowd gasped in collective horror as Senator Richard Harlow, the golden boy of his party and chief architect of the controversial Urban Renewal Act, deliberately kicked over a yaos, fragile cardboard shelter with his Italian leather shoes, sending the veteran's few possessions scattering across the icy sidewalk. "This is exactly why we need to remove these human eyesores from our beautiful city," Harlow declared to his cheering supporters, his breath forming clouds of condensation in the freezing air. But as the senator turned to walk away, the elderly, homeless man slowly rose to his full height, his military bearing suddenly evident despite his tattered clothing. And when their eyes met, the color drained from Harlow's face so dramatically that even the reporters noticed. What unfolded in those next few minutes would not only expose the senator's deepest hypocrisy, but would spark a national conversation about how we treat those who've served our country. And the ending will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power and redemption. The bitter January wind howled through the nation's capital like a scorned spirit, rattling the awnings of upscale steakhouses where lobbyists cut deals over dry-aged ribeyes. Senator Richard Harlow, fresh off a cable news appearance where he'd passionately defended his bill to criminalize urban camping, marched down Pennsylvania Avenue with the confident stride of a man who'd never wanted for anything in his life. His $5,000 Savile Row overcoat billowed dramatically behind him like a superhero's cape as he gestured contemptuously at the makeshift shelters lining the government district. "This," he announced to the trailing press corps, his voice dripping with disdain, "is what happens when liberal policies prioritize enabling over accountability." Then, without breaking stride, his polished Oxford connected with a waterlogged refrigerator box that served as 72-year-old George Miller's only protection against the deadly winter cold. The flimsy structure collapsed like a house of cards, revealing the elderly man curled in a fetal position, his threadbare army jacket from the Vietnam era barely covering his emaciated frame. "Maybe if you spent less time begging and more time working, you wouldn't be in this situation," Harlow sneered, his words carrying clearly to the microphones. The senator's wealthy donors in the crowd erupted in laughter and applause, but what none of them noticed was the tall, broad-shouldered young man in an unassuming navy parka standing at the periphery, his sharp blue eyes missing nothing, the Yoig silver cross at his throat catching the flickering light of a dying street lamp like a silent accusation. Barron Trump had spent every Sunday for the past 18 months volunteering at the First Street Veterans Outreach Center, where he'd learned that homelessness among former servicemen wasn't some abstract policy issue. It had names and faces and stories that would haunt anyone with a conscience. He'd made it his mission to memorize not just names but service details, knowing how much it meant to these forgotten heroes to be recognized for their sacrifice. When he heard the commotion and recognized George Miller, the soft-spoken Marine who always saved part of his meal for the feral cats that prowled the alleyways, being publicly degraded, something primal stirred in him. As Harlow turned to, "Eve." Barron stepped into the circle of light with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. "Senator Harlow," he said, his calm tone cutting through the winter air like a scalpel. "Before you walk away from this Silver Star recipient, perhaps you'd care to explain why your office lost his disability claim paperwork 3 separate times." The crowd's nervous chatter died instantly. Harlow froze mid-stride, his perfectly coiffed hair barely moving in the wind as he slowly turned to face this unexpected challenger. His smug expression faltered when he recognized the former president's son, not at some gala or golf course, but here in the grimy reality he claimed to want to fix. "This is hardly the place for your bleeding heart theatrics," Harlow spat. But the cameras were already swinging between them like spectators at a tennis match, sensing this was about to become the political scandal of the year. Then George Miller did something that would change everything. With hands gnarled by arthritis and decades of hard labor, He reached inside his mildewed jacket with the deliberate care of a man handling sacred artifacts. What emerged was a faded Polaroid photograph, its edges cracked, but its image preserved with almost religious devotion in a yellowed Ziploc bag. The image showed two young Marines in full combat gear, their arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning in front of a bullet-riddled building in what was unmistakably Khe-Sanh. One was clearly a younger George, his face unlined and his posture straight. The other, impossibly, was a baby-faced Richard Harlow during his much-publicized but little discussed military service. "Remember Hill 881 South, Lieutenant?" George's voice was hoarse from years of sleeping in the cold, but every syllable carried with the weight of history. "When your platoon got pinned down in that rice paddy? Who ran through mortar fire to drag your wounded ass back to the LZ?" The photograph trembled in his fingers as he pointed to the scar now hidden beneath Harlow's custom-tailored shirt. "You called me your guardian angel. You promised you'd never forget." The senator's face went ashen, his mouth working soundlessly as decades-old memories came crashing back. Social media would later explode with side-by-side comparisons proving the photo's authenticity. This wasn't just any homeless man, but the very Marine whose heroism Harlow had vaguely referenced in countless campaign speeches while carefully omitting the man's current circumstances. The silence that followed was so absolute you could hear the clicking of smartphone cameras capturing Harlow's carefully constructed image crumbling in real time. Barron stepped forward, producing his phone with the quiet confidence of a prosecutor presenting damning evidence. With a single tap, George's voice filled the air. A voicemail from 4 months prior, played at maximum volume for the assembled press corps. "Senator Harlow's office. This is Staff Sergeant George Miller, service number 18566734. The message detailed in heartbreaking specificity how George had become homeless after his daughter's cancer treatments bankrupted the family, how the VA kept misplacing his paperwork, how he'd slept on a bench outside Harlow's office for 11 straight nights, trying to get help. Barron locked eyes with the senator, his gaze unflinching. "Your chief of staff marked his case as resolved in your system. The only thing resolved was your willingness to help the man who saved your life." The dam broke instantly. Reporters shouted questions, protesters surged forward with renewed fury, and even Harlow's most loyal aides took subtle steps backward, distancing themselves from the unfolding disaster. By morning, Chant Semperlei would be trending worldwide, but the most devastating blow came when thousands of veterans began sharing their own stories of neglect under the hashtag #Harlow's Heroes, each one a testament to the senator's hypocrisy. In Trees, the weeks that followed, the political earthquake reshaped Washington's landscape. Harlow's approval ratings collapsed faster than his cardboard victim's shelter. Major donors abandoned him en masse. The Senate Ethics Committee launched an unprecedented investigation after evidence surfaced that he'd personally diverted funds from veteran housing programs to finance his re-election campaign. Meanwhile, George Miller, now recognized as a bona fide war hero, was flooded with job offers, housing solutions, and a personal apology from the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. But the most remarkable twist? Barron refused all interview requests and declined every invitation to capitalize, politically on the moment. "This was never about me," he told one persistent reporter outside the shelter where he still served meals every weekend. "It's about every George out there who thinks America forgot them." As for Harlow, the last viral photo showed the once arrogant senator serving Thanksgiving dinner at a homeless shelter, under the watchful eye of both Barron and George, who'd become unlikely friends in the aftermath. Rumor had it the senator cried that night, not for the cameras, but when no one was watching. So I have to ask, when you walk past someone like George on the street, what story do you tell yourself to keep walking? That they're lazy? That they chose this? Or could they be someone's hero, someone's savior, someone's forgotten promise? Drop your thoughts below, because the next veteran sleeping on your sidewalk might be the one who saved your father's life in some forgotten war. And if this story made you look twice at the next homeless person you see, Share it. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with a single moment of recognition.